West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy with Chef Justice Putnam. netrootsradio.com.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théâtres, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ma fleur sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire.
So Republicans are fanning the flames of a new culture war, claiming the teaching of critical race theory is a threat to our kids and to community relations. But this isn't just some abstract argument. They're actually pushing through legislation in state after state as we speak. Legislation aimed at making sure it can't be talked about in schools, which isn't just dumb because critical race theory isn't taught in schools to begin with. It's taught to law students in university. But it's also a complete violation of the First Amendment from a party that claims to be all about free speech. Joining me now is Kimberly Crenshaw, Executive Director with the African American Policy Forum. She's also a law professor at Columbia and UCLA, host of the podcast Intersectionality Matters, and she's the one who coined the phrase intersectionality and also co-founded critical race theory. Kimberly, it's a pleasure to have you on the show. Your African American Policy Forum is campaigning against these Republican censorship campaigns. So I want to start by asking you to please explain what critical race theory actually is, because Tucker Carlson and Marjorie Taylor Greene clearly don't have a clue. You do. You helped found it. Define it for our viewers, please, in the simplest of terms.
Well, the simplest of terms, and thanks for the opportunity. Critical race theory is the study of law and how it has been part of the infrastructure from slavery to emancipation to segregation to today, upon which racial inequalities have been based. It's basically an effort to think about, we have had commitments to equality since the 14th Amendment, yet our reach has not realized itself in real equality. So we're basically just asking questions and looking at the way that law has been a conduit for racial inequality, and therefore what we need to do about law in order to bring us closer to the dreams that we have as a society. But let me be clear. This is not about critical race theory. Ted Cruz knows what critical race theory is and isn't. The people who are trying to create this hysteria around critical race theory know what critical race theory is or isn't. What this is backlash politics, coming precisely at a moment where finally racial justice has become a majoritarian interest on the part of Americans from all races and all classes. So this is a way of pushing back against that without saying that we're for racism.
Yes.
They can say we're against critical race theory.
Yes, well said. And you mentioned Ted Cruz, like you, an alumnus of Harvard Law School. He compared critical race theory to the KKK. What is your response to that, to Senator Cruz on that specific comparison?
Well, it would be laughable if it weren't so dangerous and if it weren't so familiar.
Yes.
This is a mob mentality trying to Willie Hortonize racial justice. And we've seen it before. We saw it right after the end of the Civil War, when the idea that racial equality was anti-white racism was articulated by the President of the United States, President Johnson, who vetoed civil rights, saying that it was reverse discrimination. It took away from white people and gave to black people. But that wasn't the last time we saw it. We saw it during the civil rights movement, when many white people said, equality, being forced to serve you, violates my civil rights. So the idea that anti-racism is anti-white is a tried and true playbook move. It used to be part of the neo-nationalist right. It's now moved to the center of the Republican Party on the heels of this so-called hysteria around critical race theory.
And hysteria, indeed, it is. You've written nearly a dozen books on race issues, including one literally called Critical Race Theory. I want to put it in the mail to Ted Cruz's office. There's new polling out this week from The Economist, which found only 26% of Americans say they've heard a lot about critical race theory, with an additional 38% saying they've heard a little. Of those a little, over half say they have a good idea of what critical race theory is, or they think they do, and the majority view it unfavorably. If you take a look at the number of mentions the term critical race theory is getting over on Fox News, it's gone through the roof in recent months. How much does that worry you? How much does that tell you that this country is not in a good place, especially on the right?
I used to wonder a lot about how during the end of Reconstruction, people of color and people of goodwill understood what was happening. Did they know that African Americans were going to be completely disenfranchised and not be able to vote for 7 decades? Were they aware that violence was going to take hold in capitals throughout the South, that there were going to be coups? Did the media participate in it? Were they believing some of the lies or failing to ask the questions, failing to consider the source? And this moment makes me get a sense of what it must have been like. Lies being told, people believing, and people of goodwill being confused and not knowing what to do or what to make of it. See, what they need is for those who are for democracy to just be confused about it, and then they win. So the point that we have to be about right now is saying, A, what critical race theory is, but more importantly, this is about all of racial justice. If you marched last year after George Floyd, if you have had a diversity training and suddenly you understand how you could do better in your workforce, then you are on our side on this, and you should not allow yourself to be taken to some hysterical set of beliefs about this big bad thing that you've never heard of until the last month.
Indeed, and when I look at this current frenzy, Kimberly, on the right over critical race theory in our schools, it's coming for us. It reminds me as a Muslim of the frenzy over Sharia law, creeping Sharia back after 9/11, when you had states like Oklahoma amending their constitution to ban Sharia, even though there are hardly any Muslims in Oklahoma. They may say it's not racist to be opposed to Sharia law or to be opposed to critical race theory, but then the same people end up behaving in a pretty obviously racist way, banning things that don't actually need banning, and that's the dog whistle.
Well, it's not a dog whistle anymore. It's a bullhorn. They have shaken the facade of a dog whistle, but let's understand why it works. It works because scapegoating has always worked to help people cover up their misdeeds and their crimes. Let's not forget, this is the party that has put democracy on life support. And now, while they have a pillow over its head, they're saying, look, critical race theory over there. This has been a tactic. It was used by Charles Stewart in Boston, who killed his own family and pointed to a black man, Susan Smith, who pointed to a black man who killed her own daughter. These are people who are killing democracy, and they know that they can distract people from that fact by pointing at black people, pointing at racial justice, pointing at ideas that they're uncomfortable with. We need to learn a lesson from that past and not let them get away with it again.
It is Monday, the 21st of June of 2021, and you are in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. I am your chef de cuisine, Justice Putnam. Gunner the English Bulldog is our snoozing sous chef, and our daily special is River City Hash Mondays. Yes, the first full day of summer, and it's been feeling like summer a little bit early this year. For those of you who may be following me on Twitter, we had a bit of a scare over the weekend, a wildfire just a couple of miles away, and evacuation orders were given to the few people who live in that swath of land. Fortunately, it was knocked down quickly, even though the winds were quite stiff and caused a bit of problems. They were able to hold the line. Mop-up crews continue to do their job, and they better. These things flare back up when you don't mop up all the way. So you better keep some crews on scene for longer than, a lot of the rest of us would expect. But that was, I wouldn't say it was scary. It was concerning. Nah, it was scary. Yeah. And thank you for advice and good wishes and all that. That was very nice. Just letting you know, I have a go bag, and I've had one since the Loma Prieta quake. Yes, I decided at that point I better be carrying around a bunch of stuff. Actually, my go bag was in a big duffel bag. I carried 2 weeks of supplies, 2 weeks of change of clothes, socks, underwear, a few pairs of pants, a few shirts, that kind of thing. All your toiletries, shaving equipment. I even carried a little water purifier and a butane stove. Yeah, I carried butane on BART. Don't tell anyone. Just in case. Because what's good is water if you can't boil it. Okay? Trust me. You don't want that. Oh, iodine tablets. You want that too, because that will purify water to a degree. Boiling and the iodine might be in order depending on what your water source is. So, I have a go bag. Of course, this go bag isn't so much a survival kit as it is, getting needed documents out so that, you can still be you after a tragedy and a devastating fire. It's nothing worse than trying to prove who you are when you don't have the paperwork because it was burned up. Don't let that happen. So, get what you want to keep, and you can't take everything, of course. And make sure those documents are at hand so you can grab those and, some survival things. But I have a lot of survival stuff, in the car. A bunch of water for the dogs and us, the people. And a few other things, too. Little axe. One of those utility tools that has an axe and a mattox and a few other things, because you never know. You might have to live off the land. So, that was a bit scary. Oh, the reason for this is that we had, 3-digit weather, 100 and above, over the weekend, starting on Friday. They said it was only going to be 90, 95. Whenever they say that, it's like 95 to 102. When they say 100, that means, you mean 106 to 110. Depending on what part of the house you're standing on. Ew. Reflective heat gets pretty darn hot. I got to tell you. So, we live in Oregon, but we're in the part of Oregon, the southern part, right there, very close to the California border. So we live in that transition between, I call it a transition from the chaparral to the rainforest. And the rainforest isn't very close to us, though we have a few rainforest-type trees. I will say in relative abundance, not thick like a rainforest would be. But, we have all of the landscape that you would expect in that transition zone, and they eat. And now because of climate change, it's gotten even hotter. So, boy, the wildfires started early. Investigations continue on the cause of this particular one. It was on Bureau of Land Management land, not too far from the hiking trails, but also not too far from there is where, a bunch of white supremacists like to go target shooting. So who knows? Little spark here, little spark there. We don't know how. Could have been from a cigarette. Probably from a bunch of white supremacists practicing their weaponry because, finally the black people are going to kill us in our sleep. We've been saying this forever. The only reason that white supremacists say that people of color will kill them in their sleep is because that's exactly what a white supremacist would do if they had to suffer 1/8, how about 3/5 of the bigotry and racism that black people, Asians, Hispanics, anybody not white has had, but particularly black people, have had to suffer for centuries. How about 3/5? I know, I joke, but a minuscule amount. A white supremacist is the biggest snowflake in the world. The reason is because their grievance level, it doesn't take much for them to have a grievance. Not much. Whine, 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 whine. They just keep whining all the time and then complain about liberals. Oh, you're just a little liberal. Yeah, a little liberal. They mocked Joe Biden for grieving over his dead dog, Champ. Like Joe Biden being sad about his dog makes him weak. What the hell? I bet that when you dig deep, when you scratch the surface a little bit, yeah, these white supremacist maggots, I like to call them Nazis for short, probably abused animals. By and large, I bet a majority of them have, over 90%. Mocking Joe Biden for feeling sad about his dog that they had for 13 years from a puppy. Unbelievable. But of course, their demigod, or is he a full god in their eyes? Probably a full god, Donald Trump. He doesn't care about animals. He doesn't care about anybody. He doesn't care about his kids. Donald Trump gave all of those out there that voted for him pretty much the right to be the dicks that they have always been. But, because of social convention, they had to temper it a little bit. Now they don't have to. We had this guy trying to beat up on a Vietnam vet. A fairly big guy, I gotta say, holding up a sign mocking the Proud Boys and the other Nazi groups. I believe it was Coos Bay or somewhere along the coast. And the right-wingers have their, ISIS truck caravan, and they, yell out racist things to people going by and, mock anybody that might be a liberal, mock women with kids. So the community's kind of gotten fed up with it. And so they just went across the street. And there was, festivities going on. Moms with kids. And a couple of guys holding up this banner, that they painted with a rainbow flag that said, Antifa loves you. And so one of these well-known Proud Boys who actually has been convicted of spousal abuse. Yeah, spousal abuse and abusing animals. 90% at least have taken part in that. But this guy's a well-known guy. He's like cold-cocked. Just a guy walking by up in Salem during one of their attempted takeovers of the state capitol. Just a guy walking by. Had nothing to do with the protest. Had nothing to do with either side that was there. He was at the Capitol because he was there to drop off, I don't know, his property tax payment or something. Some legal document. He was just dropping it off in the drop-off window at the state Capitol. He got cold-cocked by this guy. Well, this guy's out there in other people's face. So what does he do with this sign that's being held up by a fairly large, and I will say a graybeard guy? A Vietnam vet turned out to be a sign with a rainbow flag that said, Antifa loves you. Guy comes over with a knife, a big old combat knife, and slices it up. And then starts threatening the other people there. Where are the cops? Well, you know how it is in Oregon. Oh, you don't? Let's just put it this way. The cops and the white supremacist Nazis, it doesn't take much for them to join forces. Anyway, so the guy got totally irate, and it's on phone video. It's gone somewhat viral. It's been on Twitter and other places. Later on, I will say that then the cops finally came in, and later on in the day, this incident had been long past, but you can see how it had been brewing. What the Proud Boys do, they're thug brawlers. They try to get someone to swing at them, and then they pile on. The whole biker club attitude of them piles on to whoever it was that swung at one of them. They'll come up and threaten you with a knife. Oh, this Vietnam vet did the right thing. He was screaming at the top of his lungs because the guy pushed him. He's got a knife. He already tore up this or sliced up this banner with a knife. Pushed the guy, and the guy's yelling, "I'm being assaulted." No cops. But later on in the day, somebody swung back, and then the cops called it a riot. Don't do anything to de-escalate, Mr. Policeman. Can I see your tattoos? Do you have a 3%er tattoo on? Do you have a PB somewhere? On your butt, maybe? And one other thing. This thug, proud boy, wife-beater brawler, I think they also need to pee in a jar and test for steroid or human growth hormone use. Because these guys look a little too beefy for natural reasons. Yep. Make them pee in a jar. And if they've used illegal steroids, that's too bad. Got to go to jail. Of course, I don't know. Maybe that's not the place to put them, because where else are they going to get steroids where they can work out on a gym? A universal gym there. Yeah, probably jail. Maybe. Anyway, that's what happened around here. What happened around you? It was Father's Day. I said I was able to visit, at least, distance, video type visit with my 94-year-old dad, and that was lovely. My mom took me out to dinner last night, and we were able to sit at a local Mexican restaurant, and social distancing was in place, people wearing masks, and it was good. And also Juneteenth. Yep, Juneteenth. We got Juneteenth finally. Some people are complaining like, it's just a symbol. Well, Miss Opally has been working for decades. I think you should, respect your elders, you little brat. Well, what's on the rest of the menu here? This great River City Hash Mondays in the Bistro Cafe part of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Well, at the top, that was the co-founder of the critical race theory study, the subject of such, and she broke down the GOP gaslighting about critical race theory. And it's the same old, isn't it? In fact, it pretty much proves what the study is conjecturing about now, doesn't it? Curious. On the rest of the menu, a Capitol rioter used his charity to promote violence, and apparently that's against the law. He was just doing what Trump was doing, but Trump got busted too, and he can't run a charity anymore. Official reports detail tense moments when Republican monitors swarmed elderly Georgia election volunteers counting votes in the presidential election audit. Intimidation right at the table. And the editor of the Maryland paper that suffered a newsroom massacre is leaving now that hedge fund Alden Global Capital bought the venerated daily from Tribune Publishing. Yeah, let's get rid of all of our small papers and the good people working there. After the break, we move to the chef's table, where Marine Le Pen's far-right party stumbled badly in the first round of France's regional elections. And A South African diamond rush has unearthed only quartz crystals of little to no value. All that and more on West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit. Bottom of our homepage at netrootsradio.com. To the right of the page, right there by the social media scroll, is the chat room link. And the chat room is monitored by Kelly Lincoln. Thank you, Kelly. If you would look across the page from the chat room link to the left, you will hopefully locate our link to our Patreon page. And if you could become a recurring Patreon of Netroots Radio, and if you could afford an espresso-type coffee drink, and if you could afford to send those funds our way, we are able to pool that money with what we pull out of our own wallets. And with that, we stretch those dollars beyond compare, even on the quantum level. We pay our bills, fly under the radar, continue resisting this Nazi takeover of America with a few entertaining tidbits here and there of art, music, poetry, or whatnot. And then that allows us to fulfill our civic duty as the founders originally intended, oh so many years ago, and you know how many. So thank you for your generosity, and thank you in advance for considering being so generous so that we can continue this Resistance Radio. Thank you. Follow Netroots Radio on Twitter at Netroots Radio. Tom takes care of that. Thanks, Tom. Follow me on Twitter, and you can find me at Justice Putnam. And I post the show notes and links diary on Daily Kos about 10 minutes before showtime, and then I get that linked up on Twitter and now Facebook until Zuckerberg says you bullied these Nazis enough, you have another 30-day suspension. I don't know how many more of those I'm going to get before they ban me outright. Apparently you cannot talk back to a Nazi. Just don't. They'll call it a riot then. Follow the show on Twitter at Cookbook West, and please do pick up podcasts by way of Spreaker, Stitcher, TuneIn, iHeart, YouTube, iTunes, and wherever podcasts can be found. Yeah, there's people outside with their loud internal combustion engines, making loud noises, fouling the air, and the seas, and the tributaries going to the seas. We have the windows open and the fans on very low at the moment because in the studio, we normally just shut everything off and shut everything in, but it's too hot. So if there's a little bit of a drone in the background, I apologize. I have things somewhat buffered, hopefully, padded, shall we say, and hopefully once again that does dampen the noises in the background. All right. What a day. What a weekend. It's going to be a scorcher coming up when we get to weather. I'll fill you in more about it, but it's a scorcher. It's hot. It's like being in a blast furnace, if you've ever been there. Feels somewhat similar. Okay, this first offering comes from the Associated Press by way of the American Independent. A California man charged with joining anti-government extremists in rioting at the U.S. Capitol told the IRS last year that he formed a charity called the American Phoenix Project to defend, quote, human and civil rights, end quote, and educate the public about vaccines. Oh, really? Is that what you're doing? Instead, Alan Hostetter, oh, that's a familiar name in that movement, used his tax-exempt nonprofit as a platform to oppose COVID-19 lockdown restrictions, protest that the 2020 election was stolen from Trump, and advocate for violence against political opponents. According to an 8-count indictment secured by the U.S. Justice Department. He's already charged with conspiracy to stop the certification of Joe Biden's presidency, but Hostetler could also be in violation of IRS rules governing tax-exempt nonprofits, possibly compounding his serious legal troubles. If you can't get him on the assault, get him on his taxes. The IRS prohibits charities like Hostetler's from participating in any campaign activity for or against political candidates. In his May 2020 application for the IRS for tax-exempt status, Hostetler wrote that the American Phoenix Project would not directly or indirectly engage in political campaigns. However, when the project hosted a Stop the Steal rally in Huntington Beach, and that was in last December in Huntington Beach, of course, was in California, Hostetler delivered a speech in which he called for a reckoning and said Trump must be sworn in for his second term. There must be long prison terms, while execution is just punishment for the ringleaders of this coup, Hostetler said, according to his June 9th indictment. See how they think? We vote in vast numbers. We work to increase the amount of people voting, and they called that a coup, so they had to take it over. As of last Wednesday, the IRS listed American Phoenix Project as a tax-exempt organization. It also is registered with California regulators to operate as a charity. Hostetler's attorney, Bilal Asali, accused Justice Department prosecutors of pushing a false narrative by including the allegations about his client's use of the charity. Hostetler isn't charged with making any politically motivated threats or misusing the nonprofit, he noted. They throw in really inflammatory rhetoric that they never have to prove in court, the lawyer said. Oh, really? But a tax expert who reviewed the indictment says it appears to connect Hostetler's use of the taxpayer-subsidized American Phoenix Project, including messages that he posted on the nonprofit's Instagram account, to the January 6 related crimes for which he is charged. The FBI has linked dozens of people charged in the January 6 riot at the Capitol to far-right extremist groups. Hostetler's organization may be the only one of the bunch that's authorized by the federal government to accept tax-deductible donations. And the American Phoenix Project may not be the only tax-exempt group that challenged the 2020 election results. Defending the Republic, formed by former Trump lawyer Sidney Powell, describes itself as a nonprofit, but isn't on the IRS list of tax-exempt organizations. Hostetler, age 56, of San Clemente, was arrested on June 10th, along with 5 other men from California, on charges that they conspired to stop Congress from certifying Biden's electoral victory. The indictment links 4 of his co-defendants to the Three Percenters, a wing of the militia movement. Here at the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays is also by the Associated Press by way of the American Independent. As a pair of election workers sat at a table counting ballots during an audit of Georgia's presidential election in November, no fewer than 8 Republican monitors swarmed around them, hurling accusations of voter fraud and taking photos in violation of the rules. This was one of several tense situations involving party monitors that independent election monitor Carter Jones documented in reports produced during the several months he spent observing election operations in Fulton County to ensure that officials in the state's most populous state were complying with a consent agreement. The party audit monitors seemed to feel as though they were detectives or sheriffs, and that they were going to personally crack the case and uncover a stolen election, Jones wrote in a report submitted to the State Election Board on November 20th. This is a gross misunderstanding of their role as monitors and certainly made the audit process more contentious, not to mention more difficult for the auditors attempting to count amidst the commotion of a full-scale argument. Now, let's remind ourselves, by and large, these are elderly volunteers. And when I say elderly, people older than us. And we're old. Let's be clear here. Now, while transparency is imperative throughout the election process and monitors are necessary, political parties must do a better job of vetting and training their monitors and explaining exactly what their role is, Jones wrote. He also suggested that repeat offenders be prohibited from serving as monitors in the future. No one from the Fulton County Republican and Democratic parties immediately responded to emails seeking comment. Fulton County, which includes most of Atlanta, experienced many problems during its primary last June, including hours-long waits and absentee ballots that were requested but never received. The State Election Board entered into a consent order with the county to make changes for the general election. That included the appointment of Jones, who has previous experience working on elections in other parts of the world as an independent monitor from October through January. An executive summary of his findings was released earlier this year, and Jones briefed the State Election Board in February, but detailed notes and reports produced by Jones during the process and obtained just this past week by the AP provide more details about what he saw. Donald Trump focused his attention on Georgia after losing the traditional Republican stronghold to Joe Biden by about 12,000 votes in November. Trump and his allies focused particular attention on Fulton County, making repeated, unfounded claims of widespread voter fraud. Election workers in the county were subjected to intense harassment, sometimes stemming from misunderstandings by observers about what they were seeing as ballots were counted, recounted by hand for an audit, and recounted again by machine at Trump's request. On November 14th, when Jones walked over to the table where the group of GOP monitors were hovering over workers processing a batch of early voting ballots from the city of College Park, one monitor told him she'd taken a photo of the stack of ballots that were all for Joe Biden, none for Trump, as evidence of voter fraud. "You took photos?" Jones asked. "Yes, for evidence. I'm concerned with the truth. As a journalist, you should be too," the woman replied, misunderstanding his role. When he told her photos were not allowed, she seemed to get angry and accused him of being complicit in a cover-up of voter fraud, Jones wrote in his report. About an hour and a half later, Jones observed the same party monitor yelling at a Fulton County attorney who had been called over to allow an elderly pair of audit workers to take a break. They had been working for hours to process a batch of 3,500 ballots and had skipped lunch so as not to violate the rules against taking breaks in the middle of a batch. But one of them was diabetic and was starting to shake from low blood sugar. The party monitor was demanding strict adherence to the no breaks policy. After arguing with County Elections Director Rick Barron and another county official, the monitor pulled Jones into the conversation. Jones said he tried to stay neutral, but asked the monitor to be reasonable with the application of the policy. He also let her know she could file a formal complaint with the Secretary of State. The monitor then again accused me of colluding to cover up voter fraud and made a vague personal threat, Jones wrote in his report, adding that he included the anecdote in an attempt to encapsulate the tense mood in the room. staff at the Associated Press brings us this final offering here in the Bistro Cafe of West Coast Cookbook, a Speakeasy. The editor of the Capital Gazette, which won a special Pulitzer Prize citation for its coverage and courage in the face of a massacre in its newsroom, is leaving the Maryland newspaper. Rick Hutzel, who worked at the Annapolis paper for more than 3 decades, authored a farewell column that was published on the paper's website this Saturday morning. Hutzel said he took a buyout that was offered by the newspaper's parent company. The Capital Gazette was owned by Tribune Publishing until it was purchased last month by hedge fund Alden Global Capital. Hutzel was editor of the paper when 5 employees were shot to death in the newsroom in 2018. The murder of my 5 friends, Rob Hyacin, Gerald Fishman, Wendy Winters, John McNamara, and Rebecca Smith, changed me, he wrote on Saturday. I always enjoyed the job, but I became consumed with the notion that it was my purpose to save the paper. A man with a shotgun tried to kill us, to kill me and the newspaper I poured my life into for 33 years. I was not going to let it die. Of course, it wasn't my responsibility alone, he continued. Together with a group of very talented journalists and other employees in Annapolis, Baltimore, and across Tribune Publishing, we kept publishing. And the paper published on schedule and won the Pulitzer citation. The man behind the attack, Jared Ramus, had a long-running grudge against the newspaper. He has pleaded guilty but not criminally responsible due to insanity. A trial is set to determine whether he is criminally responsible, is set to begin later this month. Hutzel said he's not sure what's next, but he said the buyout represented a chance for something new. I came to the Capitol in October of 1987 and promptly told managing editor Tom Marquardt I planned to stay for 2 years and then join the AP and see the world, he wrote. One love of my life, Shara, 2 kids, 2 houses, 4 dogs, 2 convertibles, and 1 Pulitzer Prize later, it's clear I had no idea what I was talking about. I wish I could say it's all been grand and I'm headed off to retirement, but it hasn't, and I'm not. All right, let's go to our break, and when we get back from that break, we will go through weather from around the world, and we will finish up with the stories that we have curated for you today. You are listening to West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy, and we will be right back.
You are listening to netrootsradio.com.
Please hang up and try again.
From a point at sea to the circles of your mind, a new force is at work for planetary transformation. New radio for a new Earth.
This is Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. This week, don't you love it when a plan comes together? For better or for worse, I prefer to put things in boxes. I like identifying trends and tropes, and I'm kooky for categories, so I am embarrassed to learn of a genre that has been right under my nose, of which I was previously unaware, the raunchy teen quest comedy. In the raunchy teen quest comedy, teen guys search for something. A cool party, alcohol, sex with women, one last night together, an object they've quote-unquote borrowed, which they've now lost, even White Castle hamburgers, although those guys weren't teens. In what is frequently a coming-of-age story, raunchy antics ensue. Recently, though, in a break with exclusionary tradition, women have pierced this genre's celluloid ceiling not only to make the raunchy teen quest comedy, but also to center young women as its leads. 2 years ago, Olivia Wilde gave us Booksmart, and now much undercast actor-turned-director Natalie Morales gives us Plan B. In Plan B, Kuhu Verma plays Sunny. She's 17 in a modest South Dakota town and should be studying for the PSATs, but her overprotective single mother is away for business, thus it's time for Sunny to break her good girl ways and have a party and have sex. When day breaks, Sunny finds she has mishandled her barrier method contraception. Thus, with ride-or-die best friend Lupe, played by Victoria Morolis, begins a desperate quest for the morning after pill, which Sunny and Lupe find increasingly difficult to get. Raunchy antics ensue. along with heartfelt character moments, and the tonal shifts between the two were a bit abrupt for me, but they never lost me because the vibe between Verma and Moroles is so strong. You just love their characters together, so much so that even though Plan B is a complete story with nothing more teased, I wonder about a sequel. And another reviewer had said the same thing. We just want to know what comes next. We want to see more stories with these characters, and we want Natalie Morales to give them to us. This has been Take Two Movie Review. I'm Clinton Johnston. Catch up with us at TakeTwoMovieReview.com and feed us back on our channel on YouTube.
This program is presented by the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention.
Colorectal cancer is the number 2 cancer killer of men and women in the United States, but it is preventable. Early on, colorectal cancer typically has no symptoms. It starts with a precancerous polyp or abnormal growth in the colon, which can be removed without surgery. Several tests are available to find these polyps, so they can be removed before they turn into cancer. Screening also finds colorectal cancer early when treatment works best. Recommended screening for adults at average risk begins at age 50 and continues until age 75. Learn about screening test options and find out which tests are covered by insurance. Talk to your healthcare provider about when you should be screened and discuss the best tests for you. For more information about colorectal cancer prevention, please visit cdc.gov/vital signs.
For the most accurate health information, visit cdc.gov or call 1-800-CDC-INFO.
Hi, I'm Tom Hartman, and since you're listening to netrootsradio.com, show your progressive side and go to the donate button on the bottom of the homepage. It's progressives like you who power Netroots Radio and keep the progressive message beaming everywhere 24 hours a day. Just go to our donate button at the bottom of netrootsradio.com. Thank you for keeping progressive radio at full power.
How should we observe our new national holiday, Juneteenth? I'm Bill Newman, and this is the Civil Liberties Minute. On June 18th of this year, President Joe Biden signed into law the bill that established June 19th, Juneteenth, as a federal holiday. The day before, the House of Representatives voted 415 to 14 in favor of this legislation, and the day before that, the Senate had voted unanimously in favor. Juneteenth, 1865 is the day when Union soldiers brought to Galveston, Texas, the news that the Civil War was over, that the South had surrendered, that slavery had been abolished. This was 2 months after Robert E. Lee had surrendered to Ulysses S. Grant at Appomattox, and 2.5 years after President Lincoln had issued the Emancipation Proclamation. Juneteenth is deservedly a national day of celebration. As Representative Carolyn Maloney of New York said, our federal holidays recognize the most important milestones. I cannot think of a more important milestone than the end of slavery in the United States. But the struggle to eradicate the roots and branches of slavery continues. Voting rights remain in peril. We remain far from equality in schools and jobs and housing and policing. Juneteenth as a national holiday does give us cause to celebrate, as well as a day to reflect on the struggles for equality that still must be fought and that still need to be won. The Civil Liberties Minute is made possible by the ACLU, because freedom can't protect itself.
I'm Rick Smith, and this is Labor History in 2. On this day in labor history, the year was 1943. That was the day United Mine Workers President John L. Lewis issued strike orders at the nation's mines, calling out more than 500,000 miners. The third general coal strike in 3 months defied the wartime no-strike pledge. Miners raised several demands, including wage increases, an end to the dangerous third shift, and portal-to-portal pay. High wartime inflation only worsened miners' already low wages. Early that spring, Lewis denounced the mine owners, the War Labor Board, and the Little Steel formula used to calculate wartime wages. He warned the formula meant starvation for workers and the end of collective bargaining. By April, President Roosevelt had ordered wage freezes. Miners began walking out of the pits even before the strike call, as soon as the War Labor Board handed down their decision on June 19th. The board had rejected all of the miners' demands. The United Mine Workers responded stating, quote, "No member and no officer of the United Mine Workers of America would be so destitute of principle and so devoid of honor as to sign or execute such an infamous yellow dog contract." Though the United Mine Workers were forced to call off the strike the next day, some miners continued to stay out in protest. 4 days later, Congress passed the dreaded Smith-Conley Act, dubbed the Slave Labor Bill, in response to the strike. Throughout the summer, miners across the country would rage against the government for threatening them with conscription and jail time if they dared refuse the terms of the decision. By November, the miners would walk out a fourth time and finally win many of their demands, at least from the War Labor Board. For more information, go to laborhistoryin2.com, like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at laborhistoryin2.
Thank you for accompanying us here to the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy River City Hash Mondays. We always begin weather from around the world along the banks of the Rogue River, in the Rogue River Valley of Southern Oregon on the west coast of the continental United States of America, where it is currently 69 degrees Fahrenheit. Expecting now, they say, only 98. We had forecasts just a few hours ago over 100, but at 98, where the mothership is, we'll have various degrees of temperature that are differentiated by where they are located. The hot reflective side will be well over 100. The shady side will probably be around 98 to 100 indeed. We are in an excessive heat warning for the region, so if you have similar sorts of warnings in your area, do take care. Do drink plenty of fluids. Sunshine and a few clouds. Winds will be out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Generally clear skies tonight, lows in the mid-60s, winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10. And sunny tomorrow along with a few afternoon clouds. It'll be hot with highs about 94 to 95, winds out of the northwest at 5 to 10 miles per hour. Confirmed cases of coronavirus have not been updated since late Friday. As you know, the county will update tomorrow, hopefully before the show, but sometimes after. Up until the end of Friday, we have increased our confirmed cases of coronavirus infections to 11,518, though the deceased remain at 146, which has been that total for a bit of time, about, a week or less. Grass pollen is rated very high right outside the window here in Rogue River. The air quality index for the region is good, though it's bumping almost into the moderate region. It's now at 43 parts per million. That's considered good. And the daytime UV index remains very high at 9. Do take care. Barometric pressure is holding steady at 29.92 inches. Visibility is up to 10 miles, and relative humidity is at 73%. Weather from around the world is brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that a crowd crowdsources from around the world, and we all know that affectionately as the Weather Underground. London is 58 degrees and cloudy. Paris is 78 and fair, with a warning for thunderstorms and lightning, so take care there. Rome is 85 degrees with showers in the vicinity. Kyiv is 87 and fair. Kabul is 77 and fair. Hong Kong is 82 and mostly cloudy. Tokyo is 71 and partly cloudy. Sydney, Australia is 54 and partly cloudy. San Francisco, California is 56 and cloudy with a fog warning on the bay and offshore. And New York, New York is 80 degrees Fahrenheit and cloudy. And that is weather from around the world, brought to you by a crowd of crowdsourced weather stations that are crowdsources from around the world. Turnbull and Angela Charlton of the Associated Press brings us this first amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Marine Le Pen's far-right party stumbled, French President Emmanuel Macron's centrists crashed, and incumbent conservatives surged ahead in the first round of regional elections yesterday, Sunday, that were dominated by security issues and a record-low turnout. What was meant to be a vote centered on local concerns like transportation, schools, and infrastructure turned into a dress rehearsal for next year's presidential vote, as would-be presidential hopefuls seized on the regional campaign to test ideas and win followers. Macron's rivals on left and right notably denounced his government's handling of the pandemic. The wrangling appeared to turn off some voters, and less than 34% showed up. Politicians across the spectrum pleaded with the stay-at-home voters to wake up for the decisive second round on June 17th. Le Pen called the low turnout a civic disaster that deformed the political or the electoral reality of the country and produces a misleading vision of the current political forces. The result is a clear setback for Le Pen's national rally, though it came in second place in most regions, according to early official results and polling agency projections. It is hoping to win control over a region for the first time to boost her decade-long effort to legitimize a party long seen as an anti-democratic, anti-Semitic pariah, like the Nazis. It had been riding high in pre-election polls and had steered campaign discourse toward its favored subjects of policing and immigration, though both issues are handled by the central government and not regional councils. The party dominated the first round of the last regional elections in 2015, but collapsed in the runoff as parties and voters banded together against it. The result is a deep embarrassment for Macron, whose Young Republic on the Move party had hoped to establish a regional foothold for the first time, but failed to excite voters.
Je te donne ce mon amour pour la vie entière, la promesse de me trouver à tes genoux. Aussitôt que tu m'appelles, rester toujours fidèle, c'est tout, c'est tout. Je te donne tous mes printemps, mes étés de mer, mes automnes quand les feuilles tombent partout. Si ce n'est pas une bonne affaire, je te donne tous mes hivers.
Daff at Reuters brings us this final amuse-bouche here at the Chef's Table at West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Unidentified stones that lured thousands of fortune seekers to a rural South African village to mine the land with picks and shovels were not diamonds as hoped, but quartz stones with relatively low, if any, value. People from across South Africa traveled to Kwagala in the country's eastern province, where villagers have been digging since June 12th, after a herder discovered the first stone in an open field and put out the word. Provincial Executive Council member for Economic Development and Tourism, Ravi Pillai, told a media briefing yesterday, Sunday, he had counted some 3,000 there during a visit to the site, where samples were taken to identify the stones. The tests conducted conclusively revealed that the stones discovered in the area are not diamonds as some had hoped, but were, in fact, quartz crystals. The value, if any, of the quartz crystals is yet to be established, but it must be mentioned that the value of quartz crystals is very low compared to that of diamonds. The event had highlighted the socio-economic challenges faced by local people, he continued. Like many areas in South Africa, high levels of unemployment and poverty have left communities living hand to mouth. Well, that brings us to the end of our broadcast period for the day, but you do know Netroots Radio broadcasts on, and we'll meet up tomorrow for Tarrytown Chowder Tuesdays. So do stay tuned to Netroots Radio all day and all night for all the breaking news as it breaks, and we'll meet up here tomorrow, right here in West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy. Bon appetit.
Je voudrais du soleil vert, des dentelles et des théières, des photos de bord de mer, dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je voudrais de la lumière, comme en Nouvelle-Angleterre. Je veux changer d'atmosphère, dans mon jardin d'hiver. À fleurs sous la pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, qu'il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Je voudrais du Fred Astaire, revoir un latte Goël. Je voudrais toujours te plaire dans mon jardin d'hiver. Je veux déjeuner par terre, comme aux langues de golfe clair. T'embrasser les yeux ouverts dans mon jardin d'hiver. Pluie de novembre, tes mains qui courent, je n'en peux plus de t'attendre. Les années passent, il est loin, là je tombe. Nul ne peut nous entendre. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Ba-da-da-dum-di-da-dum. 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 Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver. Dans mon jardin d'hiver.